They've got the timeline that says that we got everything 11.4 to 13.8 billion years, how long the universe has been here. That's a big range there. Just think if you were wrong by 20% on your age. Especially when you get big numbers by that. But how do they figure that out? Well, according to phys.org, study finds the universe might be 2 billion years younger. That's a 20% drop. So how did they do that? Well, scientists estimate the age of the universe by using the movement of stars to measure how fast it is expanding. So they look at the stars moving farther away from us, and they run the movie backwards, and they figure it's 13.8 billion years. But what they don't tell you is the rate of expansion is accelerating. It's getting faster, and they can't explain it with blind chance. And so they have to have a rescuing device. That's what they imagine to be true, so they don't have to give their faith in the Big Bang. So they imagine that there's dark energy out there. Dark energy, it's never been observed. It's never been, they think it's like anti-gravity that's making the acceleration go. But that same observation in the stars moving apart, that could be the same thing as in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and he stretched out the heavens. It's the same observation. Okay, and it goes down to say that a generally accepted age of the universe is 13.7 billion years based on a Hubble constant of 70. So whatever that Hubble constant is, when you have 70, you get 13.7 billion years. But these guys found a Hubble constant of 82.4. So now they're at 11.4 billion. And then there's other guys who found a constant of 67 and 74 and 73. So it's not an exact science. And yesterday I gave this talk at the community college, The Age of the Earth. The same talk, but I didn't open the Bible. It's all science. And you can see that talk maybe on my YouTube channel. But it's based on this article. It's creation.com, 101 evidences for a young age of the Earth and the universe. So if you want to dip into the science, that's going to be hopefully up on YouTube. We Facebook Lived it, but that we had troubles with that one too. Okay, so how did scientists calculate the age of the Earth? Now this tells us that they use the age of the rock is determined by radiometric dating. They look at the rocks, and that tells us the age of the Earth. With radiometric dating, there's huge problems. There's 3 unknowable assumptions. They don't know the original condition of the rock, they don't know if the decay rate's been constant, and they don't know if it's been contaminated by, guess what? Water. It can wash elements in and out. That's why we don't have lead pipes. But this article is actually honest enough to say, but hey, there's a problem. During the rock cycle, rocks are constantly changing between forms, going back and forth from igneous to metamorphic to sedimentary. Old rocks may even be destroyed as they slide back into the Earth's mantle. And that's another rescuing device. Earth's going back into the mantle. That's to support the plate tectonics and catastrophic plate tectonics. You don't observe it, but you can imagine it. But so what they really want are meteorites or moon rocks. And by the way, does anybody know where the oldest Earth rock has been found? Anybody know? They found it 50 years ago. Yes?
Granite Falls?
Nope. Nope, not Granite Falls.
Oh, guess Antarctica?
Nope, not Antarctica. According to NASA, Earth's oldest rock was found on the moon. The moon. How in the world does a rock from Earth get on the moon? And not only that, the rock was crystallized about 20 kilometers beneath Earth's surface. So 10 Ks are 6 miles, so 12 or 13 miles below the surface, the rock crystallized and ended up on the moon. It doesn't make any sense from a blind chance perspective. But if you know what the hydroplate theory is, it's going to make perfect sense. I gave a talk in November at Northwestern. And the first question was, and it wasn't about the hydroplate, it was God's clues. And he said, what's the hydroplate? And it's a 300-page book, 400. Now it's up to 600. And so I explained it in 5 minutes, the best I could. So if you go into my Solidify Your Faith page on Facebook and scroll down and take 5 minutes, you will understand how a rock formed 12 miles under the surface and ends up on the moon. It'll make perfect sense to you. And if you're interested in more of that, I did an hour talk on it at St. Cloud State. It's called Answers to Scientific Problems. This is on my YouTube channel. And if that whets your appetite and you want more information, the very first hydroplate conference was last September online. And we had 3 PhD scientists talking, and one of them was from the U.S. Air Force Academy. So we had some big hitters stepping up to the microphone. And this one's on Rumble. They have YouTube, or this one's on YouTube. Search Hydroplate conference on Rumble and YouTube, or else just go to hydroplate.org. And if you can only listen to one talk, listen to the Comet talk. And about halfway through, Kevin Lee clearly predicts what they'd find in an asteroid and a comet. And he was right from a biblical perspective. And the blind chance NASA was wrong both times. So that's, we got a lot of high ground right now, and that's why I'm blowing the horn as much as I can to get people, look at this, before NASA makes another blunder. Okay, but how did the Earth get here? This is a St. Cloud State textbook. You can see it right down there. And it's on page 22. Go down to the bottom paragraph, or the underneath the bottom one. It says, the origin of the geosphere is the story of the birth of our planet. The story begins. So that whole book is a story. It's not science. It's a story. That's a big fuzzy word, and if you miss it at the beginning, you're going to think you're being taught science. And I met a biology instructor in Virginia, and he said he always has his students have a journal of fuzzy words, like probably, might have, could have, speculate. And this is the classics fuzzy word from the St. Cloud State textbook. I have a copy of it here. Somehow, despite the harsh environment, living organisms appeared. Somehow. See, the problem with our textbooks is we have fuzzy words like this in it. We aren't teaching science, which is observation and testing. Okay, so again, the three problems with radiometric dating: we don't know the original condition of the rock. There could be some daughter element in it. And also we don't know if it was a constant rate of decay, and we don't know if there was any contamination. And one experiment is worth 1,000 expert opinions. So let's just see how well they do with their carbon dating and their radiometric dating. They found fossil wood from a quarry that tested at 20,000 years carbon date, but the rock in which they found it is supposed to be 183 million years old. There's a problem with the dating. Then they found diamonds that should be billions of years old, right? But they carbon dated at 57,000. And the rocks that they find them in are supposed to be 1 or 2 billion years old. So there's a problem. And my favorite one is Mount St. Helens. They took some lava from the dome after it had erupted, and they sent it to a lab and said, how old is the lava? We think it's rather young. And they got dates back 350,000 years to 2.8 million years. And the correct answer was 10. So there's problems. And yesterday I went through a whole list of layers, lava that we knew when it erupted, so we knew the age of the rock, and all the millions of years bad dates for it. And that's in yesterday's talk. We threw that out so we could squeeze in the Bible. But we're just real quickly going to see what some PhDs from Answers in Genesis have to say. Evidence for a young earth and creation. This is at answersingenesis.org, so you can go in there and check the sources for yourself. Number one, very little sediment in the seafloor. It accumulates this amount in less than 12 million years, not billions. But there's rescuing devices that say, well, the seafloor sediment must have accumulated at a much slower rate in the past. So they have to imagine that. That's not what we see, but they have to imagine that. And then number two, bent rock layers. Rock layers thousands of feet thick have been bent and folded without fracturing. Yeah, and that's what Mike Snavely, he showed in his video, The Horrors of the Flood. Just had some incredible footage of that. Look at that. That rock layer is bent 90 degrees. How in the world do you do that without breaking it? Blind chancers can't do that. But they have a rescuing device that says heat and pressure can make hard rock layers pliable. Yeah, well, that heat and pressure will also turn it into another type of stone. Just one problem. The heat and pressure would have transformed these layers into quartzite, marble, and other metamorphic rocks. Tepete sandstone is still sandstone. It wasn't heat. There wasn't any pressure. Number three, soft tissue and fossils. This is my favorite. We've got this Creation Research Quarterly. They found blood cells in dinosaur bone 15 years ago, and a lot of scientists don't even know about it. They swept it under the rug really well, but they found blood cells and blood vessels, and now they're finding nerves, and those can't last millions of years. And so their rescuing device, they don't really have one. They just imagine one's there. This goes on to say that the presence of actual undecayed tissue and fossils found at virtually every level of the geologic column completely undermines evolution's deep time paradigm. Completely. They find it wherever they look in that column. And that's what Bob Enyart predicted. He said you're going to find soft tissue in any one of those layers. It doesn't matter because that's evidence of a flood, not millions of years. And that's what they're finding. But to get around that, they don't have a rescuing device. They just hope they'll find it. They conclude that there is some previously unrecognized form of fossilization that preserves cells and protein fragments over tens of millions of years. So they imagine that it's out there, but they don't know what it is. And they just will not change the age of the dinosaurs. Because if they do, that whole evolution paradigm comes crashing down. Because if you don't have millions of years to hide that evolutionary fantasy in, it's going to be pretty apparent and nobody will believe it. Okay, number 5, the faint sun paradox. As hydrogen fuses, it should change the composition of the sun's core, gradually increasing the sun's temperature. If true, this means that the Earth was colder in the past. In fact, the Earth would have been below freezing 3.5 billion years ago when life supposedly evolved. Somehow, remember somehow? You know, it's supposed to be hot molten blobs. And so the early Earth would have been fainter, and it would have only been about 31 degrees. So the rescuing device is, hey, there was greenhouse gas back then that trapped that faint little heat that they had. And so greenhouse gases in the early Earth's history would retain more heat. But this means that the greenhouse gases had to decrease gradually to compensate for the brightening sun. It is difficult to believe that a mechanism so totally unrelated to the sun's brightness could compensate for the sun's changing emission so precisely for billions of years. So that's quite a rescuing device. Number 5, rapidly decaying magnetic field. And there's a book out there by John Morris. He thinks this is the best evidence for a young Earth because they've been measuring it since 1845 and the decaying rate at 5% per century. And it's got a half-life every 1,465 years. Okay, so that means 1,465 years ago, the magnetic field was twice as strong. And 1,400 years before that, it was 4 times as strong. And 1,400 years before that, it was 8 times as strong. And he says you can only do that so far before, this is what he says, until about 10,000 years ago, it would have been so strong the planet would have disintegrated. Its metallic core would have separated from its mantle. The only conclusion we can have is that it's fewer than 10,000 years old. I've heard another guy say that 20,000 years it would have been a neutron star. So we cannot be here millions of years. But the rescuing device is there's a dynamo that's generating this magnetic field. Okay, well then why is it decreasing? You know, why is it always decreasing? The dynamo model, but the model contradicts some basic laws of physics. And here's something to think about. Iron stops being magnetic at 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. That might have something to do with it. But so there's a lot of problems, a lot of rescuing devices, and just keep in mind who's making all these rescuing devices up. Number 6, helium and radioactive rocks. Helium diffuses so rapidly that all the helium should have leaked out in less than 10,000 years. So why are these rocks still full of helium? It's because they're not that old. But the rescuing devices, somehow it got trapped in there. Zircon crystals must have stopped the helium from leaking out. But they're wedged flat. There's nothing to trap it. They're not wrapped in them, so they should have easily gotten out. And Russell Humphrey, he accurately predicted the diffusion rate based on 6,000 years. Okay, there was billions of years, there's another diffusion rate. And he sent it in, he made the prediction, and it fit perfectly on the 6,000 year model. Okay, now number 7, carbon-14 in fossils, coal, and diamonds. Those are all supposed to be millions of years old, if not billions of years old, and we find C14 in there. And carbon-14 can't last, it used to be 50,000 years, and now it's got, you can't find it, 50,000 years. But now they have new machines, and it might be up to 70,000. So if you find any carbon-14 in it, it's got to be less than 70,000. But we'll just say 100,000. All that stuff has to be less than 100,000. Even if every atom in the whole world were carbon-14, they would decay so quickly that no carbon-14 would be left on Earth after only 1 million years. And they had 70 samples from coal, oil, and natural gas and marble, and they were all in the thousands. So carbon dating is the creationist friend. But their rescuing device is, it's contamination. That's what they'll always say. It's contamination. Yeah, but when they take, it doesn't matter which layer the coal is taken out of, it's all got pretty much the same amount of C14. If it was contamination, it should be random. And then they also tested the instruments with blank samples, and they yielded zero radiocarbon. So there can't be any contamination. All right, and number 8, short-lived comets. They can't survive billions of years. I've heard people say, because they can run, they know the orbits, they know the planets, and Jupiter is the big comet killer. After about, I've heard 10,000, maybe 100,000 years, all those comets are going to be gone because of Jupiter. It's a big broom sweeping out those things. They can't survive billions of years. So why do we still have them? Well, the rescuing device is an Oort cloud. They're being made out in the outer solar system, 30 to 50,000 astronomical units away, and an astronomical unit is from here to the sun. So it's way out there. It's never been observed. It's never been measured, but it has to be there because we have comets. And that was one of the predictions that Kevin Lee told the NASA scientist who was in charge of getting stuff back from the comet. He said, you're going to find stuff from the Earth in that comet. And he said, no, we're going to find stuff from the Oort cloud in that comet. And he was shocked and dismayed to find stuff from the Earth. Yeah, so that hydroplate theory, that makes a lot of good predictions. And then number 9, very little salt in the sea. That's what a woman said yesterday. She put under 6,000, or Tuesday at the VOTEC. She stroked under 6,000. I said, why'd you put it there? She said, because I've done my research. And I said, like what? And she said, there's not millions of years of salt in the sea. And I thought, good for you, you're right. There's not. Today's ocean saltiness would be reached in only 42 million years. Only about 1/70th the 3 billion years that ocean's supposed to be there. And then the rescuing device is that the inputs had to be less and outputs greater. So they have to imagine everything that's different than today, which is really interesting because they used to have uniformitarianism, which is you could only use today to explain the past. So they're just talking out of their mouth on each side of their mouth. But that's what they do. Okay, and then number 10, ancient DNA in ancient bacteria. They were shocked that the bacteria was very similar to modern bacteria DNA. Yeah, they were shocked. After 250 million years, there should have been some changes. And that's what this guy did, Carl Werner, the guy at the beginning. There's living fossils. His theory was if evolution is false, the modern animals would look identical to the fossil ancestors. And here's a whole book of living fossils. They look identical to their fossil ancestors. The only difference is the fossils tend to be bigger. We either find animals that are alive or animals that are extinct in the fossil record. Nothing, no transitional anything. And then the scientists were surprised to find that the DNA was still intact after the supposed 250 million years because it normally breaks down quickly. What's the rescuing device? It was contamination for modern bacteria. They just, say something and ignore it because it really doesn't support their belief system. And then we've got a couple more here. This is the recession of the moon. The moon is moving farther away about 1.5 inches every year. Okay, so a few thousand, 6,000 years, that's about 800 feet. But if it's supposed to be there billions of years, now you got a problem. Because eventually that at about 1.5 billion years, it would have been touching the Earth. And then once it's touching the Earth, why would it ever leave? And they can't even explain how the moon got there. They got 4 theories and none of them work. The nebula theory, it all came from the same gas cloud, but the elements in the isotopes are too different, so that doesn't work. It got spun off of the Earth because the Earth was going so fast. Well, if that's the case, well, it can't spin that fast. But if that's the case, the moon should be going around our equator, and it's not. It's going around on the same plane as we're orbiting the Earth. And then they had the capture one, where we just captured the moon, which is really difficult to do. You either get going really fast and they slingshot around each other, or they slam into each other. And if you do capture it, it's going to have this really oblong orbit. But ours is pretty circular. And then they had the collision theory. Something slammed into the Earth and it broke off. Well, that would have vaporized a lot of the elements and chemicals that are in the moon. And so one guy said, and he's a secularist, he said, the best way to explain how the moon is observational error. It doesn't exist. They can't explain it's there, so they just, maybe it doesn't exist. But this is what, do they think they tell that to the kids in the textbook? No, they just say it's moving 1.5 inches farther away each year. And don't ask questions. And that's what I'm trying to get the kids at the VOTEC especially to start doing, is ask questions. How did life begin? Where did matter come from? Because that'll help the whole class realize they can't answer it. They can't answer it. Okay, number 12, do ice cores show many tens of thousands of years? And that's, I throw that in there because a couple of weeks ago, that's what they brought up. These annual ice rings, hundreds and thousands of these ice rings. And so I brought up the Lost Squadron. And I learned all this from Kent Hovind. Anybody ever heard of Kent Hovind? Yeah, it changed my life. And on Tuesday, I was talking to another guy, changed his life too. He watched all the debates and stuff. So a lot of these are his slides, his experience. Because these people, this is in Denver, they got those, they drill those have those ice cores, supposed to have these annual rings. And yet, They're supposed to be annual, but yet there's this lost squadron. Back in World War II, they ran out of gas. They had to do a landing on a glacier or in Greenland. The first plane came down with his wheels, and he did rolling. So the next guys came down without their wheels and just landed on their bellies and just came to a stop. And then they hiked out of there, and that was 40-some years. And then 40-some years later, somebody wanted to get them out. And they thought, well, just brush off the snow and go fly them away. These things were under 270 feet of ice. And Kent Hovind asked him, how can you have hundreds of layers of ice, above something that's been there 45 years? And the guy says, those aren't annual rings. Those are just warmer, colder rings. Warmer, colder. Also, we bring up the tree rings. You can listen to this on Real Science Radio, rsr.org. And they say that the tree rings prove that we've been here over like 4,000 or 6,000 years, past the age of the flood, because the flood was roughly 4,400 years ago. And Bob Enyart never really knew how to answer that. He thought maybe there's more rings per year than one, but he wasn't sure until this guy. This is in creation.com, evidence there are multiple ring growth per year in bristlecone pines. They simulated a drought for 2 weeks and then put the roots back in water, and it produced a ring. So you can have multiple rings per year. And we need to understand that the tree ring data is not very solid. And yet they're using that for global warming, some of that stuff. Okay, now I said yesterday I'd talk about about Niagara Falls, and this is from Kent Hovind. Basically, the falls are eroding at about 4 or 5 feet a year. Okay, and Charles Lyell went there. He said no, because that would give the age about 9,000 years or so. Charles Lyell went there and said, no, it's going much faster, maybe 1 foot a year, even though he didn't even stay there a year. And so that'd be 30,000 years. They're doing everything to put it outside the biblical timeline, but you can do the research on that. But the interesting thing about Niagara Falls is it's U-shaped. And it's U-shaped because the middle part of a river goes faster, therefore it erodes more there. And I was a kayaker. I know that, but I never connected that with the waterfall, and so they're U-shaped like that. Now you see a picture of Horseshoe Falls, which is about 1/2 mile across. And when you add the American side and the Canadian side, it's about 3/4 mile across. But if you search Dry Falls, which is in Idaho, it's 3.5 miles. It's 5 times or more across. Huge, huge waterfall, and it's dry. There's nothing going over it. So at one point in time, there was a whole bunch of water, and I think his name was Bentz, that figured out there was a glacier lake that went through, that it breached, and all that water came down at one time. And they ridiculed him and made fun of him because that wasn't uniformitarianism. And he was about 97 when he finally got recognized, and they got a prize for being a good geologist. And he says, yeah, but everybody, I can't rub their face in it anymore because they're all dead. And sometimes science progresses one funeral at a time. That's how, and I've seen it in my lifetime. You get people in their old entrenched ways, and they don't want to look at anything new because that's all they know. And that's how science progresses. Oh, and this one too, the Mississippi River. This just boggles my mind. Mississippi River deposits sediments at a rate of 80,000, not pounds, 80,000 tons, not a year, not a day, every hour. 80,000 tons every hour. And that Gulf of Mexico should be all full by now, but it's not. And so they say, and it says there's about 30,000, they've done research, they think there's about 30,000 years of sediment there. And they say, see, the Bible's wrong. It's longer than the 6,000. Well, you're not accounting for the flood when there's a whole bunch of water gushing off of there. All right, so what did we do tonight besides thank you for the technical wizard there. Let's give that guy a hand. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, we appreciate that. I apologize for not having that. It worked yesterday at the Votech. I thought it would work here. But what did we do? We looked at thousands of years based on the Bible, and we don't have any rescuing devices. Then we looked at billions of years based on blind chance, and we got rescuing devices for almost everything. So what do we want to put our faith in?